Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I've been making a list as people recommend things, and you guys are always recommending new videos and new channels for me to check out. So the ones that sound intriguing, that sound interesting, I typically keep a list of those in a document. And when I'm sitting around trying to come up with an idea for what my next reaction is going to be, I'll refer to that list. And so today's one of those days. Somebody suggested to me the channel Smashing UK Productions. I'd never heard of the channel. They've got a little over 50,000 subscribers, so they're obviously doing something right and have been for a while now. And they recommended in particular the top 10 American Civil War films. They're doing this whole series apparently on top 10 films of different eras. So we may, if you guys like this and you want to see more and it goes well, we may take a look at some of their other videos as well. As always, the link is in the description. I'll encourage you to check them out. Maybe we can shine a light on their channel, get a few more subscribers their way. But let's go ahead and dive into the top 10 American Civil War films, and I'll offer my commentary on the films I've seen, and maybe we'll learn about something I haven't seen.
Continuing on with our top
Dances
10
with
war film
Wolves.
series, we're moving on to the 1860s to look at the 10 best films depicting the American Civil War. Bear in mind we are solely focusing on theatrical movies for this list, so television shows and films like Andersonville and North and South won't be featured.
Which are both excellent, by the way. The Andersonville TV miniseries, which originally aired on TNT, and I think it's available on YouTube, is really, really good. And it's based on the true story. A lot of the story of Andersonville centers around the Raiders. And North and South is really good too. Patrick Swayze, some really big time act. Jonathan Frakes is in that. Kirstie Alley is phenomenal in North and South. And then, of course, you had The Blue and the Gray, which was another really good Civil War series.
Number 10, The Red Badge of
yeah.
Courage.
What's
Audie
you
Murphy.
fellas from?
We are from Tennessee. How about y'all?
We're from Ohio.
Adapted from
Ohio.
Stephen Crane's definitive Civil War novella, director John Huston's visually striking battlefield drama stars Audie Murphy as a Union private desperate to prove he is no coward after deserting his regiment. Huston's darker, longer edit was notoriously cut to ribbons by MGM, and admittedly the 69-minute cut is still heavily flawed, but it's worked its way up the ranks as a pure classic.
How do you think the regiment will do?
Oh, they'll fight all right once they get into it.
We'll be on them like wildcats. They won't know what hit them.
Yeah, Red Badge of Courage, I don't know if you had to, but I had to read the book in school growing up. Excellent book. And yeah, it's been a long, long time since I've seen it. But one of the things I love about some of the older movies is that they had to do everything with practical effects, right? There's no CGI. There's no faking anything. If you see it on the screen, then in some way, shape, or form, they've portrayed that using real people and real explosions and all of that. It's really cool.
The boys will run.
There may be a few of them run, but there's them kind in every regiment.
Number 9, Shenandoah.
Never seen Shenandoah.
Shenandoah focuses on the life of James Stewart, who owns a farm in Virginia during the Civil War.
So Jimmy Stewart, by the way, his grandfather was an officer in the Civil War. I want to say he was a colonel, led troops at the Battle of Fredericksburg. I remember visiting the site where his grandfather's Pennsylvania unit fought. Jimmy Stewart's from Indiana, Pennsylvania. It's a town my wife's grandfather was born in. The airport's named after him there. But one of my all-time favorite actors. So if he's in it, I'm going to have to check it out.
He and his family are faced with a dilemma in which side to support, since he is opposed to slavery and does not see the value in war to begin with. The family is eventually drawn into the conflict when one of Stewart's sons is taken prisoner by the Union Army. Number 8.
That actually reminds me a lot of a storyline in The Blue and the Gray, which I referred to earlier. You have this family in rural Virginia who all of the brothers go off to fight for the South in the Civil War, but the one brother, their names are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're named after the Gospels. And the one brother is a journalist, and he ends up working for Harper's Weekly, I think it is. And so he refuses to fight, and his family sees him as a traitor for not fighting, for not taking sides. And he kind of travels with the Union Army, and it's through his eyes we see things like the Siege of Vicksburg, and we see some of the fighting in Virginia. Well, he's visiting his family to bring home the ashes of his brother who has been killed and burned up during the Battle of the Wilderness. And a Union cavalry unit attacks their home, and he finds himself grabbing a gun and defending his home and kind of getting off the fence, even though he really hasn't taken sides during the fight. Outlaw Josie Wales going to be a fantastic one. This is one of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies.
The outlaw Josie Wales.
Are you going to pull those pistols or whistle Dixie?
Clint Eastwood directs and stars in this Civil War Western, playing a Missouri farmer who joins a Confederate guerrilla group after his family is murdered by Union militias. Many of the greatest Westerns are set right alongside the events of the Civil War, with the trend of so-called revisionist Westerns using the wartime themes to great use.
And why do they do that? Why do a lot of the Westerns have Civil War themes? You know, even things like the Hell on Wheels, which kind of tells the story of the Transcontinental Railroad, because it's the years after the American Civil War is when a lot of what we know as the Wild West takes place, and so a lot of the people involved are going to be Civil War veterans. I mean, you know, for example, you've got you got the gunfight at the OK Corral with the Earp brothers, and some of those brothers fought in the American Civil War.
These films differed from the most heroic Westerns of the past by highlighting the loose morals of even the heroes of the time.
Good movie.
Number 7, Lincoln.
Also a good movie. So I'll say this, and he'll probably talk about it, but Lincoln is primarily a political movie. It's about the behind the scenes and the machinations that are going on regarding trying to get the House to pass the 13th Amendment, which would outlaw slavery. But it does show battle scenes. It shows the fight at Jenkins Ferry, which is a brutal but very effective scene that they show. Some of the best Civil War scenes we have are in movies that aren't focusing on battle in the Civil War. So, for example, the scene of the crater from Cold Mountain is phenomenal. So good. But yeah, they're showing the aftermath of the siege of Petersburg and the final assault on and taking of Richmond, in Lincoln visiting those sites, and it's all done really well.
Daniel Day-Lewis won an Academy Award for his incredible depiction of Abraham
Well
Lincoln
deserved.
in Spielberg's historical epic, which deftly unravels the president's maneuvers to push through the emancipation of slaves at the end of the Civil War.
And you got Jared Harris, a British actor. You have Jared Harris, who's a British actor, and Daniel Day-Lewis, who I think's Irish, playing Lincoln and Grant, but both do a really good job in those roles.
More of a political drama than a war film, Lincoln features a spectacular recreation of the battlefield at Petersburg.
Yeah.
We've won the war.
There's Jared Harris.
Now, you have to lead us out of it.
Incidentally, Jared Harris, he's the son of Richard Harris, who was Dumbledore in the first couple of Harry Potter movies. A lot of other things, too. So good in Chernobyl. He's great as George VI in The Crown. Some really good roles he's had.
Number 6, The General.
Ooh, good story.
The Civil War wasn't the best of settings for a comedy, but leave it to a comic genius like Buster Keaton to show that laughter can be found in all kinds of places. This hilarious and thrilling silent film follows an engineer pursuing a Union soldier who stole his train. The General features some of the most impressive stunt sequences ever put on film, and whilst the film wasn't all that well received back in its day, nowadays we have grown to appreciate it for the incredible pick that it is.
For 1920s, that's good stuff, man. So The General, it's been so long since I've seen it. Like I don't even think I've ever seen the whole thing. But the Great Locomotive Chase, as it's often called, the very first men who ever received the Medal of Honor when it became an award for bravery were these men that were involved in what we call the Great Locomotive Chase. It was this behind-the-scenes kind of Saving Private Ryan thing going on, right? Where not the same idea. They weren't rescuing a soldier, but it's this group of soldiers who are sent behind Confederate lines. There's a bunch of Ohio soldiers and a couple civilians. It's called the Andrews Raid. And they grab this train called the General, and they steal it. And basically what they're doing is they're trying to tear up the railroad tracks between Atlanta and Chattanooga. And eventually a bunch of them get captured and are hanged. And they're buried in the Chattanooga National Cemetery today. And several of those guys, it was the survivors of Andrews Raid, the military survivors of Andrews Raid, who were the very first recipients of the Medal of Honor.
Number 5, Dances with Wolves.
And they sent you here to be posted?
Actually, sir, I'm here at my own request.
Really? Why?
I've always wanted to see the frontier.
Whilst only the opening sequence generally focuses on the war itself, the Civil War still plays a background role in the themes throughout the entirety of the film. Kevin Costner plays a Union lieutenant who gets posted on the remote frontier where he ends up developing a strong relationship with the First Nation natives. When Union soldiers arrive to claim the land, he's left to decide whether to fight alongside his soldiers or to protect the tribe.
It's a good movie. It's a really good movie. Can't really add much to it.
Number 4, Gettysburg.
Now, everybody, the main criticism of Gettysburg, of course, is that it's too sanitized as far as how it shows the violence. But I get that. This is the 90s. This is before, I mean, some movies were doing that, but this is before the days of Saving Private Ryan, kind of giving us that real visceral, realistic view of what war looks like. And, you know, Glory has the one scene where the guy has his face blown apart by an artillery shell, things like that. But otherwise, I think it does a decent job. Another criticism, you know, things like how they portray Robert E. Lee. Not that I think Martin Sheen did a bad job, because I like Martin Sheen. But I don't think he portrayed Lee accurate. Like, I don't think that's what Lee was like, I guess is what you would say. And, of course, having a guy play John Bell Hood, who was in his early 30s, but the actor is, like, in his late 50s, you know, stuff like that.
Oh, one other thing. Hooker's been replaced. George Meade's the new commander. Harrison read it in the Yankee papers.
George Meade, Pennsylvania man. Meade would be cautious, I think.
Director Ronald
Random thing to point out, the guy who plays Harrison in Gettysburg, remember I talked earlier about the blue and the gray and the four brothers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who are from Virginia. One of those brothers is the same actor who plays Harrison in Gettysburg.
Maxwell's adaptation about the 1863 Battle of Gettysburg is an informative and cinematic epic spanning more than 4 hours. The huge ensemble cast includes Martin Sheen, Jeff Daniels, and Tom Berenger against the backdrop of the deadliest battle ever to take place on American soil.
I criticized a little bit of the casting. Now I want to praise some of the casting. Jeff Daniels as Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, so good. Perfect casting. He looks the part. I believe him in that role. He is so good as Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Another really good casting job, I think. Brian Mallon is excellent as Hancock. Sam Elliott as Buford. He doesn't really look like Buford, but man, do I love him in that role. That monologue he has at the beginning talking about men with gold watch fobs will thump their chests and say what a brave charge it was. You know, we will charge valiantly and be butchered valiantly. So good, so good.
A battle that was largely seen as the turning point in the Civil War, and it's hard not to applaud the epic telling of this very significant encounter.
Couple of interesting cameos too. You have Ted Turner, who financed the movie, who gets shot during Pickett's charge. You see the scene where he grabs his chest. I think he might play George Patton, General Patton's uncle, who was killed in Pickett's charge, great uncle. And then Ken Burns, who has a small cameo role, the guy who did the Civil War documentary that came out around this time. He's the one who walks up to Hancock during the artillery barrage and says, "General, will you please get down? We cannot spare you." And Hancock very famously and accurately, we know he said this, said there are times when a corps commander's life does not count. Oh, and I can't forget Richard Jordan in his last role. You might remember Richard Jordan from, I know I'm going on about this movie, but I love it. So Richard Jordan plays Armistead, and it's his last role. He already had a brain tumor and was dying. I think he died before the movie came out. But he also was in Hunt for Red October. He's the one who comes up to Jack Ryan and says, "I'm a politician," which means when I'm not kissing babies, I'm stealing their lollipops. That's the same guy who plays Armistead.
Number 3, Gone with the Wind.
I have still never seen Gone with the Wind. It's a travesty, I know.
Gone with the Wind's the movie that proved Hollywood epics could be a big part of filmmaking. The epic romance centers around the strong-willed daughter of a plantation owner in the South during the war. Despite its troubled production, the film would become an enormous hit and remains one of the most successful movies of all time. Whilst the film's depiction of the time causes some criticism, such as the soft depiction of slavery, the immense scope...
Yeah, it's very much seen through what we would call a lost cause perspective, which is what Margaret Mitchell, who wrote the book, was doing. But I got to look this up to be sure, but I'm pretty sure that it also had an African-American woman who was nominated for an Oscar for that role. Yeah, here she is. Hattie McDaniel was an American actress, singer, songwriter, and comedian. For her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind, she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, becoming the first African American to win an Oscar. So good for her. And unfortunately, she didn't live too many more years after that. But very, very cool to know that even though that was a Civil War movie that really kind of had a lot of lost cause undertones, a black woman won an Oscar for it, the first black person to ever win an Oscar. So I've never seen it, but I really feel like I got to check it out just to see her performance. And of course, we got a Northeast Ohio guy there, and I'm always ready to talk about Ohio when I get the chance. Clark Gable's from Cadiz, Ohio, which is maybe an hour and a half away from me.
Still a marvel of filmmaking to this day.
Wants to feel your arms around him. Wants to carry the memory of your kisses into battle with him. Never mind about loving me. You're a woman sending a soldier to his death with a beautiful memory.
Number 2, The Good, the Bad, and the
Good
Ugly.
Movie. So Glory's going to be number 1.
In regards to the film itself, this would typically be my number 1 pick, easily standing as my all-time favourite film. And whilst the war is a main theme throughout, it's not always the central point of focus, and therefore we didn't deem it to be technically the best Civil War movie.
That makes sense. Oh, so good. What a great movie. Clint Eastwood, again, he's got that very iconic music, that whistling sound, so good.
Hence, it only taking second place. Nonetheless, this is one of, if not the very best Western, and it is also an amazing Civil War film. This spaghetti Western follows 3 very different...
They call them spaghetti Westerns because they were, a lot of them were shot in Italy, because of the terrain looking, some parts of Italy looking similar to the Old West, and I think there were economic reasons for doing it that way too.
Different men, all in search of a buried gold as the Civil War rages around them, and the setting of the war only adds to the chaos of the movie. Before we reveal our number 1 film, there are some honourable mentions that just miss the list. The Beguiled.
Why should I have denied myself after
another Clint Eastwood movie?
You want to be so much the goddamn lady.
How the West Was Won.
You wanted a war, mister, and you got one. I hope you're the first man killed in it. Turn those wagons over!
The Horse Soldiers.
Ooh, good one. John Wayne.
Cold Mountain.
There's the crater scene at the beginning of Cold Mountain. So a lot of these movies, it's important to point out, they weren't real big on historic accuracy as far as the weapons that were used, the terrain, the tactics. It's more just about the fact that they were set in that time.
Number 1, Glory.
No doubt. So good. And speaking of casting, can we talk about Matthew Broderick being the perfect choice for Robert Gould Shaw? I think he fits the part. He's the right age. He looks like him. He's got, I think, just the right amount of youthfulness, but also ability to kind of rise up and take leadership of this situation. Morgan Freeman, Denzel Washington is so good in this movie, and he got an Oscar for his portrayal of Trip in this movie. That's Antietam right there.
Glory pays overdue tribute to the 37,000 African Americans who died fighting for the Union cause, but at the same time it doesn't shy away from showing the racism and inequality that existed in the ranks. Glory is a gut-wrenching portrait of why these men were so willing to fight in this war. It's also a film willing to show the brutality of the war in an uncompromised fashion.
So full of hate you just want to go out and fight everybody.
So good.
Because you've been whipped and chased by hounds. Well, that might not be living, but it
sure as hell ain't dying.
And dying's what these white boys been doing for going on 3 years now. Dying by the thousands. Dying for you, fool.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good movie. It's one of those ones I probably know every line to it. If you haven't seen Glory, what are you waiting on? Go watch it right now. But speaking of that, as we wrap this up, that was really good, and I definitely will dive into some more of Smashing UK's Productions videos, because it looks like they've got historic war films, World War I films. I'm sure they got World War II. Interesting. I'm excited to get into more of that. But I did, when I went to Antietam back in the late summer, I retraced the steps of Robert Gould Shaw's Massachusetts Regiment. And the opening scene of Glory, they show him fighting at Antietam. And so I told the story of that unit and where they fought and everything. So I'll put that on the end screen here so you can check that out if you want to see that and the whole series from Antietam, which I'm very proud of how that came out. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you again soon.